unmuting in discussions just so everybody can hear.
Okay, and we should be good to go. Passing it to you, Rebecca. Let's see.
Okay. Well, thank you everyone for coming. My name is Rebecca Kennedy. I'm the Deputy Community Development Director for the city, and I'm on the team that's updating our comprehensive plan and development code. Appreciate you all making time to join us and being here. We have a pretty packed presentation today. It's a lot of information. We want to make sure we're getting it all out there to you, but we will be taking pauses for breaks for questions, kind of at a couple of key points along the way, and then should have time for questions and discussion afterward as well. I am joined by my colleague Meredith Herbst, who is going to help us run the meeting, and our other colleague Mark Person, who is going to be doing the second half of the presentation. We'll all be here to answer questions, and again, we'll jump right in because there is a lot to cover. Next slide, Meredith, you want to take this one?
Yeah, so as Rebecca said, there'll be time for questions, and you can put them as the chat as we go if you just want to keep an eye on them, and we can get to them at the break or the end. And when you registered, there was just a little community agreements you agreed to, and I just wanted to share this. Community members participating in this virtual session should plan to treat each other with respect and maintain an open mind to other participants' experiences and opinions. The city encourages people to act in a way that avoids racism, sexism, ableism, homophobia, transphobia, ageism, xenophobia, religious discrimination, or any other forms of prejudice. The people who make up our diverse community come from a lot of different experiences, ages, and backgrounds. So please be just considerate as you're interacting with each other. And mainly just thank you for being here and helping make this a welcoming space for all. As I mentioned, we'll be recording the meeting. It'll be shared with the slides on the Our Vancouver website. I'll be sending them out in emails as well if you want to refer back to this or share this with friends and community members.
Okay, so again, agenda for the day is a bit packed, but we'll try to move through it succinctly and make plenty of time to talk and ask questions. So we're going to do, the first section is really about the background. So to kind of level set, like, what is a comprehensive plan? Why are we updating the comprehensive plan? How is that process informed by the city council's policy priorities and direction, by state requirements, state laws, and engagement with people across the community through really a very long and deep 3-year engagement process. And then we'll kind of talk about what comes next in the process. Then we'll pause there and just make sure everybody, if you give people a chance if they just have questions about the kind of background piece. After that, we'll move into the draft comprehensive plan, the chapters and the goals, and tell you a little more what all of those are about. And then again, Mark will walk us through the map and the draft, the sort of the zoning map and the draft code, how we have to update our development code to implement the comprehensive plan. That is a requirement of the state and of the Growth Management Act. And so we'll share more about how we're doing that. And then again, we'll tell you what's next and have time for questions. So I will just jump into it. So comprehensive planning is required under the state of Washington's Growth Management Act. It's basically requires most jurisdictions, there's some exemptions for some very small ones, but most jurisdictions in the state, both cities and counties, to plan for the built in the natural environment for 20 years. So that means things like everything you see when you walk out your front door every day, when you're going through your routine, what you see when you're out and about in the community. So when we say the built environment, we're talking about houses and residences, office spaces, jobs, manufacturing, parks, public spaces, natural areas. So it's sort of all the components of the built environment that you see, as well as the natural environment when you're moving through the community. And again, we have to plan for 20 years. A big piece of that is making sure we have sufficient room to accommodate population that growth that will be occurring, and the housing and job needs that are associated with that. So you can see that currently the population of Vancouver, actually as of 2025, Office of Financial Management, it's 205,000 now. But as of 2024, we had 200,000 people. We have, through a process led by Clark County, identified, so they basically go through a process where they select a population target from a range provided by the Office of Financial Management. They select the one they think it's most likely, and then they sort of divvy up and assign numbers, population numbers, to the various jurisdictions, as well as the unincorporated urban growth areas. So Vancouver's assignment was, and what they think is most likely to happen is that we'll add 81,000 people over the next 20 years. And that will require us to add a minimum of 38,000 housing units to address our current deficit of housing as well as future need, and about a little over 43,000 jobs to continue to provide a robust suite of employment options for people throughout the community. Next slide, please. So there's some key drivers and priorities just to be aware of that sort of are informing this process. There's a lot of changes that have occurred since our last plan update in 2011. Housing costs have risen steeply, much faster than wages. We're experiencing the impacts of climate change in a much more regular and severe way. People have changed the way that they work, they move around. There's more work from home. There's more commuting by different modes. Driving is very expensive, and so owning your own car has become more challenging for more people. So we have less people driving and more people moving around in other ways. We just have seen in Clark County and Vancouver a tremendous amount of growth. We're really transitioning from more of a suburban community to an urban one. People are moving here from all over the country, the region. And so we're just experiencing a lot of the impacts of growth, as I'm sure all of us know. We have a mandate to think about think through and make sure that we're addressing disparities in access to opportunity. So there's things like access to housing, access to education, access to employment opportunities, so that everyone has the opportunity to thrive and reach their full potential as a community member. And our council has set very aggressive climate targets in terms of reducing localized emissions. So next slide, please. There's also a lot of new state laws that the legislature has enacted over the last 4 or 5 years, related a lot to housing and climate. So I'll just cover a few of those, some of these represent pretty big shifts in the way we think about how we regulate the use of land. So one of them requires us now, HB 1110, requires us to allow a minimum of 4 housing units per residential lot, and a minimum of 6 if it is near transit or 2 of those units are affordable. It also tells us that we cannot put more restrictive standards or regulations on middle housing. So that's middle housing is things like duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, cottage cluster housing, stacked flats, townhomes. We can't put more restrictive regulations on those than we do on detached single family development, both from a sort of regulatory perspective, but also from process. We have to make the process as easy for middle housing, permitting it, as we do for single family. Again, we have to make room for 38,000 housing units, and that includes allowing permanently supportive housing, emergency shelter everywhere that we allow residential. We have to account for the racially disparate impacts of past policies, decisions, and show how we are going to help, again, address those disparities going forward with updated codes and policies. We have to allow a minimum of 2 accessory dwelling units per residential lot. So those are usually smaller, attached or detached in unit or separate building on a property that provide another unit of housing. So you probably heard them call like mother-in-law flats or father-in-law flats. But typically it's a smaller unit that is kind of accessory to a primary housing unit. There's a lot of state regulation around parking. Parking minimums cannot exceed certain levels. The city's we're moving towards getting rid of parking minimums entirely. Development builds the amount of parking it needs. We have recently implemented a new state requirement to allow single loaded or single stairwell buildings up to 6 stories. So with improvements in fire suppression, and all new big buildings have sprinklers in them. This essentially makes it so you can have 1 stairwell rather than 2, a requirement for 2 in buildings up to 6 stories, and only having 1 stairwell reduces your cost, but it also allows for it allows you to utilize your floor plate more efficiently, so you can get kind of different sizes and configurations of units than we typically see in apartments when you have to have 2. We have to make our impact fees. So those are the fees that new development pays to cover the relative impact it has on our systems. So think transportation, school, and parks. We have to make sure that those impact fees are proportional to the size of housing. So for residential uses, a smaller unit needs to pay less impact fees than a larger unit. And then again, I mentioned earlier, we have to allow for permanently supportive housing basically everywhere. So that's housing where you've got services on site, whether that be like behavioral health, mental health, whatever that is. Next slide, please. So we've been doing engagement for this project since early 2023. Yes, 2023. Wow, time goes fast. We have talked to thousands of people in person and via online surveys and mapping tools. We've held a variety of workshops. We've tabled at many community events. We've talked to neighborhood associations. We present to the council and the planning commission all the time on this, and those are public meetings where people come and they can learn and they can provide feedback. So just a lot of engagement. We do presentations like these. We have an in-person one coming up on Saturday at City Hall, and then another in-person version of this on Thursday at Cascade Park Library. So we do a lot of work meeting with neighborhood organizations, but also community-based organizations that serve a variety of needs and different groups. So a lot of engagement, and we're kind of at the last phase of that engagement. So again, we thank you for being here and for participating in it. So the process of the comp plan update. So the first part of the process is really to do a bunch of analysis that helps us understand what we are planning for. So in addition to the population and the housing and the jobs, we have to understand what have our existing policies and rules resulted in. What do we need to change in order to hit those new targets? The other piece of that was a lot of visioning work, educating and visioning with the community. So this is what the process is, and then helping, talking to folks about what they want to see. What do they want the future to look like? What is their aspirational Vancouver in 20 years? What really should we be working toward, in addition to the baseline of meeting the requirements of the Growth Management Act and all the state laws and the council's policies. The next phase was to look at alternatives. So we did a bunch of mapping activities out in the community. If you participated in those, thank you. Where people kind of actually drew on maps and talked about, okay, what's the kind of type and scale of development and the mixing of uses that we'd like to see in different parts of the city and why. We use that to create 2 land use alternatives. So those are 2 different versions of essentially a zoning map. And we analyze those through a draft environmental impact statement process. So that's a requirement of the Washington State Environmental Policy Act. You have to analyze changes, both rules, regulatory changes, plan changes. You also, another part of SEPA, have to analyze the impact of any individual development, generally, with some exceptions. So we did that. We had a public comment period. We took those comments. We took the council and planning commission and many other groups' feedback and direction, and we created a draft preferred alternative. We worked with our council to refine that, and they endorsed a preferred alternative map, which essentially is the new zoning map for the city in December. Now we have released the draft of the plan and the draft of the new code as well. And sort of that's where we're at. We're doing engagement. We'll be taking feedback from all of you and many other people through a similarly robust engagement process as the other phases of this. And then in late spring, we'll start the process with our planning commission and city council of adopting a final version of that plan and code. And so what we hear from people through this process will inform refinements that we make to that code based on our council's direction. Next slide. I should say we're targeting an adoption date of early June, a final council action. So really quick, just want to take our first break and see if folks have any questions about like the Growth Management Act or comprehensive planning generally, or the process. Feel free to raise your hand if you'd like to.
Yeah, Mike.
With the plan at this stage of maturity, the final EIS should be equally, or if not equally mature or completed. Has it been completed for the preferred alternative?
So the final EIS analyzes the draft, the final plan, the final code, and the final map together. And so that will be released when we have a final version that we'll start the adoption process with. So we can't release it yet because we have to analyze the final versions of everything. So that's the way the process works. The final environmental impact, really, we've analyzed the range of potential impacts now. And the final one will answer all the questions and comments, substantive questions and comments we got through the draft process, and then provide that sort of final analysis of impacts and mitigations. So that'll be released when the final plan is, so likely late April, and that really informs, the analysis of, it provides that, it covers what SEPA requires for that final plan and code adoption.
So as a reference, we should fall back. If I wanted to look at the EIS plan, the current posted one is the most up to date.
Correct. You can look at the draft environmental impact statement that analyzes the two alternatives. The preferred map is kind of in between those, but it will definitely tell you and give you a very detailed set of information about the range of impacts. Yeah.
Thank you.
And I know, Cynthia, I think I saw your hand raised on screen, so I'll jump to you first, and then Greg, we can get to your question too. Cynthia?
You're muted, Cynthia.
Cynthia, can you hear us? You're muted. Oh no, we still
can't hear you.
We'll come right back to you. I'll jump to Greg, and then can we come back to you, Cynthia? Is that okay? And if not, we can put something in the chat. We'll be right back to you. Greg?
Will there be a point in the process where the city responds to the comments that citizens made along the way? Like, we think you should do this, or, we think this about this particular aspect of the plan or the code, that sort of thing.
Yes, and it happens in sort of different ways. So we have been responding and sharing out the information that we get from people all along the way to our planning commission and council, and it has informed the preferred alternative, the draft of this plan, and the code. So there's a lot of the substance of this stuff, and in many ways is informed by and responding to different community comments, although obviously it doesn't mean everybody is getting exactly what they want. The other place that we'll be responding in detail is through the draft, the final environmental impact statement. Any question that was submitted through the DEIS process will be any substantive one. If you just said, I don't like rain or something, right? There's none, but any question about that's your substantive we'll respond to in that process. The other way, though, is that people come in and they speak to our city council and our planning commission, and then they may ask us to respond to that as well. So the other way is to talk to the city council, planning commission. You can submit written comment. You can come to their meetings. If you're on our email list, our distribution list, we send out reminders before all those meetings so people know when they're happening, where they're at, what time they are. If you want to come or register to testify virtually or just submit public comment, written comment in advance. So that's kind of the third way, is that like as people speak to the decision makers, they will often ask us questions or clarifications, or give us direction about adjustments to the plan. The council is the ultimate sort of decider of what gets adopted.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Cynthia.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, first of all, on my screen, it says chat is only available during the meeting and it won't let me type anything. And then secondly, the question I actually had was, where do the neighborhood action plans from the neighborhood associations fit into this future adoption?
Yeah, great question. We've got, so in addition to neighborhood action plans, we've got tons of adopted plans and policies in the city. And some of those represent, sort of older direction that is maybe no longer current, or some of them are really recent. In the case of neighborhood action plans, those are neighborhood adopted plans that talk about things that are aspirational for them. Many of them are older, so we've been talking to our Office of Neighborhoods about what action plans action planning at the neighborhood level might look like going forward. What are the sorts of things that the information they should capture so that we can make progress on stuff like that. But they're still informative. So if you have neighborhood action plans you'd like us to take a look at, we have looked at all of them way early in the process, but a lot of them are 10, 20 years old and may ask for things that aren't legal anymore, may ask for things that have already happened. So they are informed. They do inform the process, but they're one piece of a lot of stuff that's informing the process.
Thank you. I can write messages now. I'm in Harney Heights, and we have that huge development project coming up. And so we're revising our action plan, but a lot of it has to do with the hardscape and parking that seems to concern people. So that's why I was asking those questions. Would it be a good idea to have someone from your department come to one of our neighborhood association meetings?
Absolutely. Yeah. Just if you want to just put your email in the chat, one of us will follow up with you, and happy to come and talk about that. So yes.
Yeah, we're looking more toward May or June.
Yeah, absolutely. We're happy to come. We go to neighborhood association meetings a lot. So
okay, thank you.
And Meredith just put our email, the project email, in the chat, so you can just email us and we'll respond.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Mike, we'll go ahead and ask your question, and then we can get to the second phase of this presentation.
I look at the upcoming the new zoning maps, and I see a low level or a low density, mid density as it's rolled out across the neighborhoods. And I try and understand why those definitions were made. Some of what I see doesn't fit, and I'm wondering, where do I read the criteria, find the criteria by which those decisions were made?
So there's a lot
As
of
an
places.
example.
But yes, so are you asking me like how was the decision made, or are you asking what is the definition of a low scale neighborhood or a medium scale neighborhood?
As an example, R2 moving to mid density, medium density, those are 1 unit on half-acre lots and their view lots, et cetera. Now they've been raised to mid-level densities. And you can imagine that the neighborhood is up in concerns about those actions. So I'm trying to understand it, and so we can talk to it intelligently. So I'm kind of up against, oh, I'm sorry, I should introduce myself as Evergreen Highlands chair, just to make that clear. So I'm trying to understand the criteria behind those decisions so we can talk about it intelligently, factually, and then respond with intelligent, factual requests.
Yeah. So there is a list of documents up on our website, Meredith. If you want to put the link to the documents page in the chat that show all the analyses that have been done that have gone into this. So they show an analysis of what our existing housing capacity is under our existing zoning, what we need to get to meet state laws, and how we've went through a process of mapping activities, and how we got to the preferred alternative. Ultimately, the preferred alternative was a council directed and endorsed map that helps to meet our long-term housing goals and needs. We essentially, you mentioned R2, so 50% of the city is zoned for single family residential use right now. So 50% of all the land in the city mostly only allows 1 unit or a duplex on it. And that has really gotten us to where we are, which is we don't have enough housing. We see an affordability crisis. We see a huge mismatch in supply and demand. And it is not even legal anymore for us to continue that zoning because of state laws. And so if you think about that, so in terms of how did specific areas get upzoned, there was a criteria for it. There was like access to transportation, development capacity, all kinds of sort of things that the council, they had a framework for having us look at these areas. So I'm happy to walk you through that offline. We could spend 2 hours on that entirely if you'd like to get more into it. But the documents page that Meredith put in the chat has all those background analyses.
All right, if I may, will the zoning, the low income set asides for future developments, will those be applied to past developments? For instance, the waterfront developments downtown. I mean, they're obviously very nice. So
let me just stop you real quick. There is no requirement. We don't have mandatory inclusionary zoning in the city. We're not proposing it. There is no requirement that we have affordable housing in any given project. So that doesn't exist, and it's not being proposed.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
All right, thanks for your questions. We'll keep moving.
Okay, so I always feel like I'm talking a lot in these, and this is a pretty meaty piece, but I'll try to move through it quickly and just give you sort of a taste of what each chapter includes, and then we can again have time for questions. So the Growth Management Act requires comprehensive plans to address a set of elements, and we've organized those in chapters. So land use and development is where all the policies and goals around the built and natural or built environment are. Housing is all the goals and policies around housing. These are the kind of lists that you see. They're the things you kind of think about making up a city. So, houses and offices and hospitals and parks and schools and open space and jobs, transportation needs, right? So those are all the chapters on the right. On the left is what's in each chapter. And so this is how we've organized each chapter. It talks a little bit about historical context and current conditions. So where are we and how do we get here? It has a vision statement that's been endorsed by our council. It identifies key challenges and trends that we need to respond to through the updated plan, policies, and code. It has a section summarizing community feedback that we've got throughout the process. It applies an equity lens, really to think about, okay, well, if we're talking about, say, parks, how do we ensure that people have equitable access to the opportunities, the recreation, the outdoors, right, that the parks provide? There's a goals page, so it describes what the goal is trying to achieve, and it has a list of key supporting policies. And then there forthcoming is a list of, I think, Meredith, the key actions are also in there in each chapter. It says TBD, but they're in there. So we should take that out for the next one. And then there's a introduction in the beginning that's sort of a, hey, here's what we're doing. Again, kind of the level setting we just did. And it also has a ton of definitions, because there's a lot of words in this plan that maybe we don't necessarily use every day, like accessory dwelling units, that we want to define so people can understand those. Next slide. So I'm just going to walk you through the goals at a high level of each chapter. Community experience is really about how do people feel? How do they experience living in the city of Vancouver? What's their social infrastructure that helps make their their community connections, the places they visit and go, that kind of make up their life. Also, like, who do we want to be? One of the things the community, there's a goal around innovation. The community, through the process, really talked about being a place where we try new things and we work hard to solve tough problems. And we are a safe and welcoming place for everyone. And also talked about just community pride and identity. So, a sense of what it means to be a community member in Vancouver, and what it means to kind of live in this space. So that is what the community experience chapter covers. Equity inclusion really talks again about this equitable access to opportunity piece. So that is, again, we talk a lot about what we call essential services, things that people really need to be able to thrive. So think of things like hospitals, schools, parks, daycare facilities, grocery stores, right? Like things you need in a daily, really like regular basis to thrive, and making sure that people have the equitable community goal is really about like people having access to these things. Universal design is really about like, okay, let's design things so they work for everyone. So to sort of regardless of whether you have some sort of disability. We talk a lot about how we make the built environment work for people who are blind and low vision. How do you move through the community if you can't see? And how do we make things like public signs accessible so that if we've got a sign that tells you how to get to, from Esther Short Park to the fort, that someone who's blind or low vision can also have access to that information. There's a big emphasis on youth and elders. So there's a kind of saying in planning that if you build for people who are 8 and you build people who are 8 years old and 80 years old, it's going to work really good for everyone. So young folks have unique needs. Folks who are growing older have unique needs around access, aging in place, and obviously youth have a lot around access to schools and good outdoor space and stuff like that. So there's a lot of policies around sort of taking care of our young and our older communities. And then there's another one just around good government, right? So being transparent and inclusive. A lot of things we've talked about through this process and that we're trying to do better at as a city is, we all know we have like a affordable housing crisis. I mean, I think everybody kind of recognizes that. But what are the numbers around that? How many houses are actually getting built each year in Vancouver? What type of housing is that? And so coming out of this, one thing our council has really emphasized is like easy to access dashboards with clear data and information that people can go to and see how we are making progress towards the goals that we've set. Next slide. The land use and development, this is the one we're going to talk, I know we'll talk about most because it's the one we talk about most in every meeting. But this is really about what are the goals for the built environment. And this is really where the zoning code is the major, one of the major implementers. Excuse me? Oh, okay. Is the major implementers of this chapter. So we have one big goal for our council is more connected and accessible neighborhoods. So this is really the idea that people live in places where they have access to those essential services that are, sort of daily needs easily and close to where they live. So things like I've got to note that my audio is breaking up. Is anyone else having trouble hearing my audio? Meredith, can you hear me? Okay. I'm sorry. I don't know that it's on. I don't know that it's on our end. Okay. Thanks, everyone. So connected and accessible neighborhoods again, like so things like having access to grocery stores, having access to medical clinics, having access to parks and schools. Daycare is a huge one. Having access to childcare facilities is a big deal. Half the childcare spots in Vancouver have closed. So half the childcare spots that existed prior to the pandemic in Vancouver do not exist anymore. We have a crisis of childcare too. And so this is really about connecting accessible neighborhoods is like I said, where we've had this history of really separating things. So we've said 50% of the city is just going to be really, single family housing. And, jobs are going to go other places, and commercial services will go other places, and multifamily housing will go other places. And this is really about building more integrated neighborhoods where people have access to, at a reasonable scale, but things that they need, things like a small doctor's office or a cafe or a small daycare facility in your neighborhood. Preserve and invest in employment land. So this is a big one. And when we say employment land, we're largely talking about places that like lots of employment happens in mixed use areas where you've got residential and commercial together, or just commercial areas where you've got a lot of offices, and you see that. But we have industrial land in Vancouver that is really for industrial uses. So, and those lands we don't have a ton of them, and they are really important for a strong economy and for maintaining family wage jobs that don't require an advanced degree. And so there's a big emphasis on that. There is a big emphasis that it's really important to meeting our climate goals of reducing carbon in the built environment. So that's really about construction materials, the energy use in buildings, how buildings contribute to heat islands and stuff like that, and how can we over time make some progress there. Then a huge one, and I think this goes to Mike's question earlier about like, why is a neighborhood that's really, really, really low density right now looking at changes? It's the efficient use of land. So we're adding a bunch more people, and we cannot accommodate them, and we cannot have the jobs and the housing that the folks need if we just continue doing what we're doing. And so we need to use land more efficiently. Vancouver is landlocked. It cannot, it cannot, there's not vacant land to absorb. And we'll get to annexation, but if we did annex parts of the UGA, that means more people and more housing and more jobs, because all that area has to accommodate growth too. And so really driving to the efficient use of land, growing up and in and not out. Next slide, please. So this is a growth concept. This is intended to be illustrative. It's not like a bunch of data, but it's just showing different types of centers and the kind of different character of places as we've zoned and mapped them around the city. So the urban core is in downtown Vancouver. That's the highest concentration of jobs. A lot it brings it, or let's see, it has a lot of housing and will continue to have a lot of housing. It's kind of the widest range of mixing too. You see all kinds of commercial uses, office uses. You see low scale manufacturing. You see like a lot of sorry, totally lost my train of thought. You see public open space. You're going to see lots of civic uses like the convention center. So anyway, you see the kind of broadest range of mixing there. You've got regional centers that really complement the urban core that also will accommodate a lot of growth and have a lot of mixing. So those are places like Columbia Tech Center, the Vancouver Innovation Center, Van Mall, that have a lot of will grow quite a bit. And then you've got some local and neighborhood centers, and local centers are really areas that are serving several neighborhoods around them. So if you look at like Main Street, Upper Main Street, north of Fourth Plain, really like that's serving several neighborhoods, and the things on that corridor lot people access. And then really neighborhood centers are areas that are serving a neighborhood or two. It's a little cluster within a few neighborhoods that may have a cafe, it may have a doctor's office, that kind of thing. So those are really trying to communicate scales of development and the level of mixing you're going to see. Next slide, please. Okay, housing. Housing's a big deal. We've got 6 goals around housing. One of them is just to allow the private market to build more housing, produce more housing. We do not have enough. The reason that we, Jessica, you want to go back to the map and I can answer Jessica's question real quick? Just go back since we were right there. So what is an employment center? Employment center are areas that just have large concentrations of jobs, and they tend to have industrial land. So you look at like the port, other parts of Root Valley, Van Mall North up sort of near Costco has a lot of jobs. So those kinds of places, there's but it tends to be more industrial or mixed, like mixed use industrial office development. So you kind of see that on parts of 112th East Fourth Plain. Next slide. Yep, of course. Okay, back to housing. So housing production, build a lot more housing and build all types and sizes of housing at different price points. I think it's really important to note that the city, the government, doesn't build very much housing. Really, we don't build any housing. We fund the construction of affordable housing through the Affordable Housing Fund. We match, usually when you're doing affordable housing, which is housing that is below market, so it's affordable to people who make 60% of area median income, say, which by the way is a teacher or a bus driver. It's housing for working people. But the city doesn't build this. The private market in our system builds the housing. And so we want to make it easier for the private market to build lots of different types of housing to meet lots of different needs. Reducing homelessness is a major goal for the city. We are very proactive in this space. And I think it's really important when people say, well, like, is homelessness really like a housing thing, or is that really like something else? And it 100% homelessness is a housing problem. There is only one thing that statistically correlates in the United States to high rates of homelessness. It's not poverty, it's vacancy rates, low vacancy rates, which it really means you have very low vacancy rates, you have a big mismatch between supply and demand. And so in order to reduce homelessness, we need more housing. A lot of folks who are struggling with housing, they're working folks who can't afford housing. It has gotten so expensive. Preventing displacement is really about making sure that people of all income levels and all demographic groups can benefit from the improvements we all make together. So as we add housing, we want that to be affordable and accessible to people that make all different ranges of incomes. Whether you're a homeowner or a renter, we want it to be affordable. We want it to be people to have access to housing regardless of their race, their ethnicity, whether they have a disability or not. So really, we want to make sure that we have options that work for people so that they don't have to leave because it becomes so unaffordable, and then they can't benefit from all the things Vancouver has to offer in terms of the essential services I was talking about. So jobs, employment, healthcare. Access to homeownership is a big deal, and it's a priority for our council. If you own your home, you build one, you can build generational wealth and equity. Many of us, I think, know about that. And then the other thing is you're just not stuck in the cycle of annual rent increases. You've got a fixed rate mortgage and you know what your payment's going to be, and you're not constantly dealing with rent increases. And I talked about affordable housing. So, but just so everybody knows, the way we define affordable housing is it's not like a set number. It costs this much. Affordable housing is defined as someone not paying more than 30% of their income for housing. That's the threshold. If you pay more than 30% of your income, we say you're rent burdened. And that really means you cannot afford to pay for housing and pay for other things that you need, like utilities, like food, like medical care. Next slide, please. Okay. Economic opportunity. This is really about jobs, investing in people, making sure that folks have opportunities, whether it's education or the trades, but to be able to participate in the economy. It's about having lots of, sort of a diverse economy with lots of options. So, we've got like a lot of biotech in Vancouver, and that's wonderful. And most people are not biochemical engineers. And so we want jobs for everyone, whether you're manufacturing glue lamps that help build stuff in the community, whether you're creating new medicines that are going to save the world. We want all those jobs, the full range of jobs. And we want a diversity of jobs because we go through economic cycles and we want to be resilient in the face of those economic cycles. And then so circular and sustainable economy is really just looking at like, how do we build an economy that is where we've got strong local businesses that are investing back in the community, that are hiring local people, and how do we move towards an economy that is less about resource extraction and is having less of an impact on sort of the climate change that we are facing. And then place-based growth is really about investing in place. So how can the city make investments that support employers wanting to be here, that support small businesses starting up and entrepreneurs like starting businesses and then growing them here and hiring local folks and being part of the community. Climate and environment, again, I touched on this probably in every chapter, but this is about resiliency and climate adaptation. We specifically look at heat risks associated with heat, flooding, and wildfire smoke. Those are the three big ones that we look at and need to adapt for and that we call out in our climate vulnerability assessment. We're also looking to increase biodiversity in natural systems. So, the best way to prevent flooding is to put back native plants who are going to filter, or, they're going to retain and filter that water down back into our aquifers. Decreasing emissions overall, again, our council has a very, very aggressive goal to get to zero, some net neutral, essentially, local GHG emissions by 2040. And then environmental health is about things like having access to clean air, having access to land that's not contaminated from previous users that maybe dumped contaminants or chemicals on it. It recognizes that different parts of the community have different environmental health conditions, and we need to address those so that people have a clean, healthy environment to live in. Next slide. Okay, we're gonna get so parks and recreation. I think everybody knows this. I'm gonna try to move a little faster, but we want people to have access to parks and recreation, both developed parks, trails, natural areas. There's a huge tie to health and health outcomes through recreation. There's a huge tie to quality of life. I mean, this is things in our annual city survey. People consistently rank parks and recreation as huge priorities. We also think about, the sort of, how are our parks and our public spaces how inclusive are they, right? So you'll see like a lot of our playgrounds have been being updated so they are accessible for kids who may have a mobility impairment. We also think about the events that you see around the city and how those are inclusive and represent lots of different cultures and communities. So there's a big tie to sort of arts and culture and the cultural landscape as well. Transportation and mobility is all about transportation. You got to move around. We all got to move around to get to the things we need. We want and need to have an integrated transportation system that is connected, not just within Vancouver, but across the region so people can get to the things that they need. We want to have more low carbon mobility choices. So more folks or more facilities that are safe for people to bike, to walk, to use an e-scooter safely and at a reasonable speed, to take the bus, all of that. We need to move freight efficiently. Freight is a huge contributor to our local economy, and it brings tens and hundreds of millions of dollars to our economy every year. We work closely with the port and other industrial land users. We got to be able to move goods around the community, the region, and really the West Coast and the world. Washington exports a lot of stuff as well. And then the last goal is about eliminating traffic fatalities. We don't have good numbers in terms of the number of fatalities we see in the community, both folks driving cars, but also what we call vulnerable road users. So people who are just walking or biking and aren't surrounded by a bunch of metal. We have too many severe and fatal injuries that result from the transportation system and the fact that we have a transportation system that really wasn't built for everyone. Next slide, please. Okay, public facilities and services. You got to serve growth. That's a key component of the Growth Management Act. You have to be able to demonstrate that you can provide services to the growth that you are planning for. So what are services? Services are everything from picking up trash and recycling every week, delivering clean water, making sure your sewer system works, managing stormwater runoff and rain, and making sure that we're retaining that and that any runoff, dirty runoff is treated. And so what goes back into the ground is clean. It also includes things like emergency services and responders. So police and fire, to show that we can serve the growth and the needs. And also things that parks is another thing we have to show. And then things also that the city doesn't manage or run, but that other agencies do, and we have to partner with them. So things like schools is a big deal. And of course, transportation. Right? Transportation is a big public facility. The street network represents the largest city asset in terms of total land that we have, right? And so we've got to show that we can move people around. There's also just about how we service or how we provide services and how we finance those, making sure that it's high quality, that we try to keep it affordable, that kind of thing. And then we need safe infrastructure. And so this has been a lens that we've been putting on parks and transportation for a long time, but making it safe for all users, regardless of age, ability, or mode of travel is a big deal. So that's kind of the public services side. And then lastly, annexation. The Growth Management Act intends for cities to annex the urban growth areas within the 20-year planning time horizon. That obviously has not happened in Clark County. The urban growth area, Vancouver's urban growth area, just ours, not Ridgefields or Battlegrounds, right? But Vancouver's is about the same size as the city, almost like 170,000 people live there, and it's developed. So it's not like that this is new land where new development is going to occur and it's going to pay impact fees for the services it needs. This is developed land that does not have urban infrastructure built to urban standards. And so it is a big kind of challenge to think about how would that big of an area come into the city, and how would we be able to provide services to that area in a financially sustainable way. So we have policies about that will help guide future decisions around annexation. Okay, I'm going to pause.
Great.
And I'll stop talking after this section, and Mark will talk, so you'll get a new voice. But anyone who has questions, feel free to raise your hand. And Cynthia, you still have your hand up. I don't know if you have another question or if that's just from last time.
Yes, I had another question. Many of us who live in the older areas of the city with larger lots don't have sidewalks and streets that are even having sewers or even catch basins. So is there a part of the plan that addresses upgrading those areas as well as the annexation? Because all of that contributes to the livability of the built environment. We don't even have streets that our kids can walk, sidewalks that our kids can walk on. We're trying to get them through the Pathways to Schools program. But how are we going to address the older areas as well as the ones you're going to want to annex?
Well, I think that's the thing, is that again, wanting to annex is maybe not the way to put it. Growth Management Act sort of intends that. And so we're really going to be looking at, is it under, under what circumstances does annexation make sense? And one of those is that it does not take away from the services our current residents have. So in terms of, though, your kind of first question about how do older areas get sidewalks? So when your neighborhood was developed, the developer didn't build sidewalks. How do we get sidewalks in neighborhood? Development builds sidewalks. So when something new is developed, that frontage is required to, with some exceptions, like some of the real low scale development won't probably have to make frontage improvements, but almost all development is going to make transportation improvements. They're going to make frontage improvements. If you don't have curb and gutter, they'll be required to do that. I think it's really important to understand that, like, if we were to, like, I think the cost for all the sidewalk infill in the city that wasn't built at the time of development would be like, $1 billion, right? That we don't have revenues that would support just the city building, the public jurisdiction building all that infrastructure. That's development builds infrastructure. They pay impact fees and systems development charges, and we require improvements when that happens. It doesn't mean we don't try, and I think you mentioned the Safe Routes to School program. We're trying to find ways, cost-effective ways to add sidewalk. But I mean, the fact is, like, a mile of sidewalk infill costs like $1 million.
That's right.
So
About
it's just,
$600 a foot.
yeah. So one way we get it is through the requirements we put on new development, which we need to make reasonable, right? Or that development won't be feasible to build. So it's always that balance between the requirements we put on it and, not making it so onerous that no one builds anything because they can't make any money off of it.
Right.
Before we get to the two folks who have their hands raised, there was one in the chat a little while back on annexation, so I thought we could talk about it now. It says, I live in Orchards just outside city limits. I understand annexation within the UGA, the urban growth area, is expected to occur over time. Is the Orchards area currently considered a priority or phased annexation area, and what factors would trigger movement in that direction? So just questions about the annexation process.
Yep. There is no priority area for annexation. Our last annexation plan was done in 2008. Y'all know what happened in 2008. The recession hit, city cut almost 50% of its staff. We stopped annexing entirely. We've only done one since then. That was Van Wall North, like kind of the Walnut Grove area. And so there is no prioritized list. So I think part of the sort of things that need to happen is we need to develop an annexation plan, but we have to be able to work with the county on that. We have to understand the state of the infrastructure. Again, the county doesn't build to urban levels or standards. So, for instance, when we did the Van Wall North annexation, we inherited Andreessen 5-lane arterial street with 45-mile-an-hour posted speeds. It doesn't have streetlights, and we're spending millions of dollars to add streetlights to that street now that it's in the city. So we have to do an inventory of all the state of the infrastructure to even really know, well, what would it mean to annex that area? Because once you annex, I mean, we still talk to people who are part of the Cascade Park annexation that were like, why haven't you built me sidewalks, right? Once you annex, people want, and they deserve services, right? And good infrastructure. They're coming into the city. They're now paying city taxes. They want that stuff. So you have to understand what you're taking in. So that's a long way to say there is currently no plan. Before any annexation, I think, really starts, we have to have a plan. We need a lot of information to have a plan.
Ben, I saw you had your hand raised. And then Mike, we can get to you.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks you guys for doing this and for helping to get information out there. I know it's appreciated. I just had a couple questions. So I see a couple of objectives that kind of seem to be pulling against each other in here. Like I saw at the beginning where there's going to be minimum unit requirements for for new developments. And so essentially what is like single family housing lots now, it's suggested that those have like a minimum of 4 units on them, et cetera, but there's no maximum, which seems to, for example, if I were to sell my single family house, it would seem to incentivize the maximizing of the units that can be placed there, which incentivizes turning a single family house into, if the competition comes down between a development corporation that has deep pockets and can afford to put, 100 apartment units on what is currently a single family house versus, first-time homeowners that are, or potential first-time home buyers that are trying to just to scrape together the savings to get a few percent down. I'm going to take, the development corporation's offer for, $200,000 over my asking price, which seems to incentivize more building apartments and reducing home ownership or stock that's available for home ownership, and then increasing the impact on the infrastructure that even if the developer builds it out, the city still has to maintain it. So how does the city pay for that, and how do we balance these things with each other?
Great question. Yeah, so a couple things. So let's see. One, I just kind of want to dispel the myth that multifamily means renters and single family automatically means homeownership. You can have multifamily homeownership. We have it in the city now. We are working to make it even easier at the state level to do multifamily homeownership. The other thing around homeownership is the middle housing piece, right? And so if you, the middle housing has been really shown. So things like townhomes, or stacked flats, cottages where you've got, smaller units around a shared open space. Those are easier to do what we call fee simple homeownership, which is you own your lot and you get a mortgage but there's lots of ways to facilitate homeownership, and it is not just leaving things exactly the way they are. Because what we know, right, is most people cannot become a first-time home buyer with the housing supply deficit that we have. We have seen cost increases raising on sales prices 10, 12% a year, right? So just leaving single-family neighborhoods is not going to result in more home ownership. It's going to result in less because we will continue to see housing prices rise. We will continue to see fewer and fewer people able to enter the market. So providing a range of ownership opportunities and a range of like types and sizes, smaller, multifamily, attached, right? Like that is how we are going to facilitate more homeownership. It's not just continuing to do what we've done, which is not utilize our land very efficiently. So the people who are in, and the people who are out are out. So that's one thing. The other thing is, I think it's important to understand how we pay to build new infrastructure and how we pay to, maintain and operate it. So, for instance, you're talking about, let's say the water system. So if someone came in and they needed to build, we needed a bigger water pipe or whatever, and you need laterals to whatever you're putting on that site. Development's going to, they're going to build and pay for all the access. They will either contribute to or have to, they'll contribute or have to pay into the upsizing of the pipe. And then we maintain this stuff through ratepayers, right? You pay a water bill. So that's a lot of how that happens. Yes, we have to maintain infrastructure, and it's not just like, the only upsizing of things happens through development, but a lot of it does. So that's the second question. I think it's really important to understand that development really does pay for a lot of the infrastructure upgrades that we see. And it's not just the lateral to your property. It contributes to upsizing pipes and that kind of thing as well. Sewage treatment plants, like big capital stuff. So I think we've sort of the home ownership discussion is really sometimes gets like stuck, and I get it, right? Like I own a single family home, I totally get it. But that's the only way you have people entering the home ownership. And in fact, limiting it to that is the way we have kept people out of home ownership opportunities. So we can have a lot of different options. I think you call out, though, a good issue. And the thing is that you see tension, right? Like tension between some of these priorities. And yes, absolutely, right? These are hard things to balance and get right. And the one that we often hear about and talk about is between housing and trees. Everybody wants more trees, and we need more tree canopy to address heat islands and deal with climate change. And trees and housing both need space on the ground, right? And so how do we balance those things? And so you see things in our code that is, and Mark can talk about it more, but it's like, okay, well, how can we incentivize people preserving mature trees? And how can we use public space to add lots of trees, but still requires some trees, obviously, as part of all private development. It's a balance. We're trying to balance these things, right? And it's tough. We're land constrained, and we're planning for a lot of growth. We have been growing very quickly. That's why we have some of these challenges. And I think it's pretty fair to say that we're very likely to continue to grow pretty quickly, because it's a great place to live. And frankly, as the climate changes, we have water and a reasonable environment for people. So hope that helps.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And I know we're a little past noon, so let's do Mike if you want to ask your question, and then Dave, and then the 3 questions in the chat we'll tee up first for the end of it, just because I know we've got some more information we want to share, and don't want to take more than 2 hours of your time. So
Yeah.
Mike, go ahead.
Out across the city, there are many houses of 50, 60, 80, even 100 years old, I'm sure. We see the old craftsmen's homes in downtown, for instance, maintained or not. Point is that houses live a long time if they're maintained. So they're structurally livable for years. 100 years, not an unknown thing. What is the expected turnover rate of that as-built housing environment? The city went out and I can see the move to low density and mid density, but those are just zoning statements out across the land. What is the expected turnover rate of that existing as-built set of properties, and then the infrastructure to support it? To build a new sewer plant, for instance, probably takes 5 to 7 years to go through the contracting process, and then the award, and then construction and completion. So what is that turnover percentage? Where does it focus the city and its efforts?
Yeah. So a few things. One, in terms of when buildings turn over, which, so it's really not about the age of the housing stock. Some of the older neighborhoods in the city have the highest values. It's real hard to afford an apartment in Carter Park right now, or buy a house in Carter Park right now, right? It's expensive. And so some of the oldest areas of the city, where you see redevelopment is where it makes sense from a financial standpoint. So when we think about redevelopment, because again, city doesn't do this, the private market builds stuff, right? That's the way capitalism works. So when you have a building that has not been maintained and has a low value, versus the land being valuable because it's near stuff that people like, or it's flat and developable, whatever it is, there's lots of things that kind of contribute to a land value. So if you have a building that's not worth that much money and land that is, reasonably valuable, or you could have successful development on it, that's where you're likely to see redevelopment, demolition, and then reconstruction, because someone can afford to buy that thing, right? That old building and that valuable land, and pay to build something new on it and still make money, right? That's when you see redevelopment. So it's really that those conditions are not like, that's not everywhere. That's not most places. So we don't have like a rate. It really depends on what type of development you're talking about, right? What scale, who the builder is, right? Like, it's not like we provide regulations that allow for a range of things, and then the person who buys it decides what they want to build and who they want to serve. I mean, we have tons of builders who want to build 4,000 square foot townhomes, right? Like, they want to sell those for $900,000. And they'll make money doing that. And building 2-story buildings is not very expensive compared to building 6-story buildings. So there's not a rate. It really depends, but I would say that like it's most places that the development economics don't work to demolish things. They just don't. Where we do think we can see progress, and even this will be very, very slow and incremental, is infill. And that's again why middle housing is important. It's not big moves, right? But it's a lot of little moves that can add, a duplex, a triplex, an ADU, whatever, in areas that already have infrastructure, already have services, all that, and can be done relatively cheaply, which means it can be relatively affordable to other people. So, and then on the question about yes, it does take trust me, it takes a very long time to build like a sewage treatment plant, very long time. And that's why we do capital facilities planning. So we have lists of projects, and we know about how fast we're going to grow, and we know when we need to bring a new X thing online, and so that's why we do it. So we know how to serve growth. We plan for it, we invest in it, we fund it. The development pays for some of it, and ratepayers and the city and our taxes pay for other pieces of it, and that's kind of how we do it.
All right. So Dave, and then the other questions in the chat we will get to first thing at the end of this next section. So thanks for your patience on that. And I'll pass this now to Mark to talk about the draft zoning code.
Thanks, Meredith. Mark Person here. I'm a planner in our development review section of City of Vancouver Community Development. I'll be taking y'all through our draft zoning code. Next slide, please, Meredith. Thank you. So every parcel in the city has a zoning district or a base district, as we're kind of moving to in this new framework, but I'll use those terms interchangeably. And that controls, like the previous slide said, kind of what can be built where. And again, we definitely want to emphasize that city builds very little, right? We just set kind of some of the parameters, and then our private sector folks and community partners really are the ones who build out our city. So each parcel will have a base district, and that will include minimum densities, as we've kind of referenced here, and we'll go through those in detail in a couple slides, and maximum height. The big change from at least the zoning code point of view is, right now we have, I think, 17 zoning districts, and most of that is due to the fact that we really regulate tightly now the parcel size. I think, as Mike mentioned, R2 and R4. We have R6, R9, R17, R20, R18. We just have so many residential zones. A real gradient. All those dimensional standards are moving to building typologies, and will be carried with the building. So those lot standards, those setbacks, those lot coverage, and we're actually moving to max impervious. The frontages and landscaping will really be tied to the type of building that you're doing. And then we'll still have allowed uses, just like we do now. But as you see on that table on the right, one of the bigger changes is, as Rebecca mentioned, right now nearly 50% of the city's land is zoned exclusively for single-family homes, and recently we have allowed duplexes on those parcels as well. But we're really hoping, again, for a mix of not only housing but also commercial, neighborhood serving commercial that can help us achieve our goals for those connected, accessible neighborhoods. We'll also have some overlays. Downtown we have our airport overlay. We have a noise overlay, since downtown is close to the railroad tracks, the flight path for Portland Airport. We have a river there as well, and just letting folks know, hey, this can be a noisy area, and also we have standards for indoor noise limits. And let's see, our density, as was mentioned previously, we're focusing on minimums in the new code. Our current code has minimums and maximums, but we'll really be focused on those minimums and letting height setback and other site constraints, show us or kind of limit what can be built there. As far as parking, as Rebecca mentioned, right now we have parking minimums, and in the planning field, it's kind of widely known now that those are based on very little data and have been copied kind of from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, and our best guesses at best, we're planning to rely on our development partners that we feel know their use and what they'll need on site. So we're not saying you can't build parking, and we're not saying that you have parking maximums. We're just saying we're not arbitrarily setting a parking minimum. And as far as building placement, right now we have mostly minimum setbacks. We're going to be moving to maximums in a lot of places, really trying to move most of those building types closer to the street. Next slide, please, Meredith. So here are our 10 new zoning districts. We have our low scale and medium scale neighborhoods. And while the preferred alternative wasn't a one-to-one changeover, there were, as Rebecca mentioned, a lot more analysis that went into that. That being said, a lot of our existing R2 through R9 neighborhoods have been, are going to be slated for low scale and medium scale neighborhoods. So those are mostly residential neighborhoods, but they'll also, again, allow those neighborhoods serving commercial uses. And then we have our mixed use and regional activity centers. Those are our higher density zones along our corridors, and regional activity center is, what downtown will be in addition to some other areas of the city. We'll have institutional campus. That's areas like CTC, Clark College, and Peace Health. And then our industrial employment lands for those jobs. And then our heavy industrial isn't really changing in location or really any standards. We just made some minor modifications to our heavy industrial sites. You'll also see a mobile home park zone that's intended to preserve our 16 existing mobile home parks that we have in the city. Trying to keep those areas as naturally occurring affordable units as long as they can remain viable. And then we have 2 park zones, those being developed parks and the natural areas. Next slide. This is that preferred alternative, our new zoning map that council approved in December 15th of 2025. And you're able to access this, an interactive map. Of course, Meredith, thank you, has put in the chat. So you can find any parcel here in the city. It's existing zone, existing until this is formally adopted as part of the comprehensive plan and zoning code update later this year. And then what it will be in the new zone. Next slide. So here we're showing those base districts. We've dropped off parks and open space, our natural areas, since those aren't going to have units in the future. But showing manufactured home, our low scale and medium scale neighborhoods with 8 and 16 units an acre, and then it moves up from there with our higher intensity zones. No residential allowed in our employment zones, our institutional campus. Excuse me, our employment industrial and heavy industrial. We are allowing residential in our institutional campus zone. And then our maximum heights in the far right column. And you'll see floors, except for low scale, though we won't be controlling limiting height by floors. We'll do it like we do now in feet. But we did hear from our stakeholders during this outreach process that, in order to build up on some of these smaller parcels, they'd like to be able to build to 45 feet. And our compromise was, okay, we'll look at that, but we're going to limit you to 3 floors above grade. So make those floors and those ceilings higher, and windows and air and light be more of a livable unit. Next slide. So here are the building types I kind of referenced. This is where most of our development standards will live. And middle housing, planners have been talking about middle housing for a long time, and we're excited to see it finally coming to the city of Vancouver and jurisdictions Washington-wide. But really what that means is, in addition to the single family house that most of us are familiar with, it's duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, up to sixplexes, and also cottages, which we have had on our code for a while. So those are the kind of the innovations that we're looking at that Washington State passed as part of House Bill 1110 a couple of years back. So you'll see our low scale and medium scale zones allowing all of those middle housing typologies, and then as you step up to medium scale, we'll add multifamily buildings in there as well. And then as you move from left to right here, you'll see as the intensity increases, mixed use, most things are allowed in there, and then most of the middle housing drops off at Regional Activity Center. We don't think those building typologies can meet the minimum density for the most part in those zones. Next slide, please. Just like we have in our current code, we're going to have additional buffers and setbacks between zoning districts. And we think that's important for the new zones, new zoning based districts, since there are bigger jumps between heights and bulk and setbacks between those some of those zones. So where a mixed use or a medium scale property shares a property line with a different zone, we'll just be asking for that additional setback, landscaping, and calling it a step back or a step down in those areas. Next slide, please. As Ben mentioned astutely, there are goals and objectives for sure that are pulling in different directions, and staff and policymakers have definitely been struggling with those as we've gone along in the process. And trees, as Rebecca mentioned, trees and density sometimes are pitted against each other. We are making a major update to our trees and landscaping standards. I don't think these have really changed significantly in maybe 35 or 40 years. So we're making some changes based on best practices and bringing it up to some current standards to meet the current moment in where we're at in 2026. And some of that is increasing preservation requirements for trees in good condition that are 12 inches or greater, increase the size of landscape islands and surface parking lots to make those plantings more viable. And then we do have a provision in our existing code that allows folks to hand water their landscaping, or just finding that in our current environment that's not really working very well. So we're going to require new development to have irrigation systems. And then most housing developments by building type will require some open space, some landscaping, typically between 10 and 20%. And then we'll have some requirements for larger master plans. So if you're looking at a larger site, 10 acres or greater, that will have a requirement for publicly accessible open space. Next slide, please. So with 38,000 new housing units, we'll definitely have some increased folks moving around, and part of the strategy to help that make that a smoother transition, as Rebecca mentioned, is allowing for folks at least the opportunity to move about and not have to use their car if they don't want to. So walking and rolling through our Complete Streets program. We have plans for upgrading some key arterials, 18th Street and a portion of 192nd. But just want to be clear that, those are kind of the exception, and in most places we don't have the right of way, or the funding to make, large scale wholesale improvements along corridors. We also believe that, making those connected, accessible neighborhoods by bringing that, neighborhood serving commercial to neighborhoods will hopefully allow folks, shorter trips to meet some of their daily needs. And as we mentioned too previously, minimum parking requirements for residential, for most uses, are going away. Again, we'll have requirements for folks when they provide parking, what the size needs to be to meet the stormwater code, and size for access and aisle width. But for the most part, really not telling folks what they have to do as far as minimums. Let's see, next slide, please. We're making some changes to our development notices. We rely really heavily on direct mailing right now, and we found that that's decreasing in its efficacy in the past decade or so. And then that middle housing legislation is also, as Rebecca mentioned, it requires us to treat middle housing just like we do single family. And we don't notice for single family homes, so we won't be noticing for those middle housing applications that are basically six units or less on a parcel. For those larger developments, we're moving toward something similar to, I think, that Portland uses. It's some early notification with a large format sign. Right now, our code only requires that we post notice on type 3 applications, and I think our notice sign is 18 by 24 inches. It's not very large. So we're looking at possibly a 4 feet by 4 foot by 4 foot sign posted by the applicant very early in the process. So we'll continue to have our pre-application requirements for most developments. That'll be a point where neighbors can get involved. And then prior to land use submittal, the applicant will post this large format sign on the site for type 1s. And then for type 2s and 3s, we'll have that large sign. We'll have that pre-app, we'll have that large sign, and then there'll be a public comment period once that application is submitted and deemed complete. Next slide. Okay. I moved through there fairly quickly. Leave lots of time for questions. Do you want to?
So I think we missed someone last time, and he's had his hand up for a while, and I can't see.
Dave's been hanging out there for a while.
Dave, let's have Dave's question. Thanks for your patience.
Yeah, thank
Dave.
you. No problem. Thank you, Rebecca and Mark, for taking the time to go through all this. I know it's a large undertaking. I had a couple things. The first was, Rebecca, there were several times that you mentioned that developers and development pays for infrastructure. That, in a sense, is true, but I want to remind you that at the end of it all, it's the end user that's paying for it. It's the leasee, it's the owner, or it's the renter. It's not the developer.
Yes.
So
yes.
It's super important that we remember that when we're incorporating these new design standards, this shiny stuff on these plans that's being required. And that ties into Mark's section. We got to really look if we want affordable housing and we want, diverse neighborhoods where we're able to have these different uses. We can't make the regulations too prohibitive. So that was the first thing.
No,
Really
hold
quick.
on, hold, yeah.
Oh, okay.
I was
Yeah,
just going to ask Dave what the shiny things were that he noticed.
We've
Well,
stripped it down pretty bare.
So, Mark, just so you know, I've been going through the code. I'm 200 of 800 pages through it, so I will have plenty for you. And then, and one of those is the actual notification that you just discussed. There's some parts of the proposed draft that I think are broken. Specifically, the requesting the sign stay up a year after submittal. From an enforcement standpoint.
No, hold on, Dave. It needs to be posted no more than 1 year, but no less than 35 days. But that's not clear.
Then
we can work on that.
Yeah, and then it states after that it has to stay up until permits pulled or a year after the submittal. That's not going to work for anyone.
Sure.
Okay, but yeah, no, that's the big thing. And then I did see that you guys are starting to incorporate some of the tree stuff. I saw there was criteria to allow the removal of I don't know if you call them heritage trees or whatever, but critical root areas out of net areas and things like that. That's all in the right direction. That's the stuff we've been complaining about for a long time. And then the last thing, and someone in the chat brought it up when we were talking about the differences in standards between the county's infrastructure and the city's infrastructure and the annexation and the problems that brings. Someone brought up, trying to work with the county to maybe come to a compromise as to what urban development is. And I support that fully. I think that, I personally believe counties should be developing rural and county properties and they shouldn't be developing urban development. So thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And please do send us, like that feedback on the sign, and anything else you find in the code. We've been working really closely with folks who do this for a living and trying to really make it work because we want people to build stuff, right? So please, we do welcome your feedback. And then I just wanted to your first point, wanted to say that, yes, it's a really important point, and thank you so much for pointing that out. I say development pays for it because I think folks who maybe don't do development or aren't like in the planning world think like I pay for it, right? But it's important, I think, to note that the project will be charged for some of this stuff, but who actually pays? You are 100% right. It's the end user. So you're very right. Like, we're trying to make our regulations as flexible and simple, but also addressing people's needs, because the more we do know, the longer the process, the more requirements, the more expensive stuff gets, and then you got to charge higher rents to make that pencil. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks. All right, before we get to Mike, I'm just going to read a couple of them in the chat. One of them is, in lieu of annexation, how does or could the city work alongside Clark County to support the unincorporated areas of Vancouver?
Great question. And we've been talking to the county about this. Last summer, the city manager and I gave a presentation to the Clark County Council on annexation and sort of talking through some of the challenges related to, service delivery, financial sustainability, the state of infrastructure, and really was very, very productive and a great conversation. And it really has opened the door for us to start more conversations at the city manager, county manager level. And I expect that, that's going to continue, because great comment, Sam. Yeah, I think we do absolutely have to work together in order to meet the community's needs. And so we're trying to figure out what maybe that looks like, or a renewed version of looks like.
All right, another one here is, if the state is requiring the additional development, has Washington provided funds toward doing it to cities in urban growth areas?
I'm guessing this is just about the state requirements that I walked through in the beginning. And if that's the case, no, those were all unfunded mandates. And some of them are not necessarily gonna cost, some of them it's really driven at changing regulations. So, it's not really about going back in time or having to pay to change things that already exist, but it's really about like what gets built in the future, which I think is good and generally we support. There are some requirements around providing numbers of units affordable at different income bands. And on the lower end of those requirements, there is no way we or anyone else in the state will hit those because the state does not provide enough support for affordable housing. It would literally require like World War II levels of investment in affordable housing. So we are advocating at the state for more resources to do this as well. And unfortunately, right now, I'm doing it in the context of budget deficits. So it's a challenge.
One more in the chat, and then Mike, I'll jump to you. This one is rent control on the horizon in Vancouver, especially if the affordable quote rent should be about $1,700 per month?
No, rent control is not. Well, rent control that is specific to Vancouver is not on the table in Vancouver. The state has passed statewide rent control. We believe that's the appropriate level. Sort of jurisdictional level for that to happen at, because it sort of forces everywhere has a limit on annual increases. Rent control doesn't tend to work when you just do it in one spot, outside a few exceptions. Like New York City is an exception because it's not like other places, but typically if you do rent control like in one city, if you just did it in Vancouver, you'd push development to Camas and Ridgefield and Battleground where they didn't have that, and you'd see more housing being developed farther away from jobs, services, and infrastructure. So we have statewide rent control. I think we typically think that is the sort of jurisdictional level at which that makes sense and doesn't have really bad adverse impacts. We are not considering any additional Vancouver specific rent control at this time.
All right, Mike, you want to go, and then I'll keep reading some other ones from the chat after you.
Excuse me, thank you. A question first to Mark, actually to all the planners. The term best practices have been used repeatedly, and specific to Mark, since you've got the podium, what best practices, what are the source for your best practices? Is it a document someplace? Is it codified in state law somewhere? Or is it, where does it come from? And then the other part of that question, I think, Rebecca, I'm going to have to ask you is I was listening in on the city council on the 23rd. I got called away to our neighborhood association meeting, so I missed this piece. But I believe the statement or the question and the city council committed to something on notifications of the building permit or planning process. So I got that part through word of mouth after I had left the meeting. So either one,
Sure.
best practices or
Mike.
zoning. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. I think what I was referring to when I said best practices was our tree preservation and landscape code, and our urban forester contracted with an expert in their field to kind of look at what our peer cities were doing, and I think, you know, as I think most of us know, best practices change over time, right? So our existing tree preservation and landscape code was written at least 35 or 40 years ago, and our environment's changed since then, and our city's changed since then. So that was where the best practices came from for our tree preservation and landscape code.
Is that a Vancouver City best practice document, or is that a statewide, or is it just an industry-wide, loosely gathered up set of practices?
We hired a professional arborist that was also a planner that worked on it, and we can share that information with you if you'd like to review that.
Well, beyond the arborist, or beyond the foliage question, best practices for laying out the city's zoning philosophies.
So yeah, Mike, I can kind of give you. So So
Great.
there are a number of organizations that work in this area. So depending on what your goal is, there are lots of different places that you can go to see best practices. There are professional organizations for planners. There are organizations that just study what's working in cities in the Northwest. So I recommend you take a look at Sightline or FutureWise. Those are Washington specific organizations that monitor what cities do relative to goals around housing and climate planning. And they put out best practices like we studied X in Kirkland and it's working this way. They have data and sort of technical data to support these things. But there are many, 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 many out there. So for instance, our city is a member of the National League of Cities. It's an organization that brings electeds from and technical experts from the city together to tackle tough issues and to try to find solutions. So right before the council meeting on Monday that you're referencing, one of our council members who had just been at a National League of Cities convening on housing brought me back this book. It is titled The Little Book of Low-Cost, High-Impact Housing Solutions. It was put together by experts in the housing field for the National League of Cities to help local jurisdictions figure out the best things they can do. So best practices are out there. They're everywhere. There's tons of professional organizations that study these things, the American Planning Institute, the Urban Land Institute. I check out the Washington ones, Sightline and FutureWise. Sightline's a good place to start because they study Washington and Oregon and British Columbia. So like specifically, and there's reasons for that around climate and sort of shared climate stuff and issues. And then on the other question, so we had been talking about how we notify specifically neighborhood association leaders about development application notices in their neighborhood. We had put language on the slide that said opt in to our listserv, and the mayor had said, no, we just need to email them or add them automatically when they're elected. And we already do that. We just used, but there was a language mistake. We're just going to keep doing what we're doing, which is notifying elected neighborhood association leaders when there's development in their neighborhood. But we're going to eventually open that up. We want to open that up to anyone, so anyone can get notified of development, because it's neighborhood associations represent a very small percentage of the overall community, and we want anyone to have access. So it's not really a change so much as just a clarification from the mayor that we needed to be clear that happens automatically, which it already does, and it still will. We just used bad language in our slide.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I'll read out some more from the chat. When I built my ADU accessory dwelling unit, I was required to install a rain garden to funnel off rainwater from the hardscape and roofs to the water table and not sewers. This cost an extra $10,000 in 2019, and planning required it be added to the ADU that accessory dwelling unit permits. Is that type of infrastructure also being added to the plan? Or like, are we requiring these sorts of things for additional housing units in the future?
Great question. So I just want to do a little in defense of our planners. So the planners take in your application for development, and they're the project managers, but they circulate it to all other departments. So in particular, our engineering departments. And so the stormwater team, I believe, not the planners, but it is the city, right? And so we get your question. We're working with our engineering groups to figure out how can we make middle housing as efficient as possible while still, meeting all the requirements of their, state and federal permits for stormwater management and stuff like that, and everything else, PFAS, everything, right? So I think I can't speak to this specific project, Mark. I don't know if you have more specific to say, but all I can say is we are trying to build a process that is as efficient as it can be, both from a resources and a time standpoint. And I think that'll be an iterative thing as we get people start to understand middle housing more as a concept, because really it was like single family and multifamily for forever. And now it's just middle housing and multifamily. And so I guess to say we're working on it.
Next one is city codes require off-street parking in the established neighborhoods every night, which contributes to underused parking. Also, parallel parking instead of rear or front and first parking on cul-de-sacs. Can these be changed to allow better use of parking in our established neighborhoods?
Yes, we are. Go ahead, Mark, please.
No, I don't have a whole lot. I mean, I think we're trying to fix that with our removing our parking minimums for the most part. I just wanted to chime in on the cul-de-sacs. I think I understand the point, Cynthia. I like where you're going, but that I think if they're doing like head end or 45-degree, that's going to change the geometry of that cul-de-sac, and that's pretty important to our fire and solid waste folks. So I think we're gonna keep. I mean, I think we have to keep for the time being, at least, unless for some reason that cul-de-sac is oversized. Keep the configuration of front and first, which I'm reading as more parallel parking. So that's all I had on that one.
Yeah, but I mean, we appreciate the comment. I mean, parking takes up a lot of land, and it's parking minimums that don't really make any sense or come from anywhere. One reason they contribute to the cost of housing. And so, that's why we're looking at just moving towards a more rational system where developers build the parking that they need to serve the client, the target market they are building for. Some of them will build tons of parking. All of them, with very few exceptions, will build some parking. I guess, yeah, I think it's important to note a couple of things in this conversation. One is on-street parking it doesn't belong to anybody. It's public. That's public access. That's public parking. It's a public infrastructure and amenity. So we want to use that more and use more other space for housing. But there are so Mark mentioned it, but the fire department has to be able to turn their trucks around. The garbage collectors got to get their trucks in there. And so some of the geometry is about that access and not really the land use code. But thanks for raising it. And yeah, I mean, I think we're looking to how can we, maximize existing infrastructure for parking so that, housing can go in other places.
Okay, we just have a little over 10 minutes left, and I think there's 2 more questions in the chat. If we end up not getting, if you have questions at the end that we're not able to get to within this 2 hours, we can send us your email, send us your questions. Our email's here. You can drop your email in the chat if you're comfortable with that, and we can do some follow-up. But I think we should have time for these 2 questions. Does the minimum residential density impact future uses for new construction or renovation for what are single family homes right now? Like if I'm in a single family home right now, but the area I live in is being converted to medium scale, but what I want to rebuild my house, would I be required to follow the minimum densities? And kind of second part here, is there a way to request that a medium scale area be reconsidered as low scale area?
Yeah, thanks, Jessica. We have gone over this early on and made some commitments to council and the community. Single family is still going to be allowed. We're encouraging different housing types for different folks and for folks to be able to age in place and age in community. But understand that, if you have a single family house in the low scale or medium scale right now, that that can be rebuilt and not need to meet minimum density. In addition, if you want to throw an ADU or 2 or 3 in the back and you're still not meeting what would be medium density, we're fine with that. Where we're going to request that someone meet minimum density is on newly created lots, or let's see, if it's I do struggle with this every time. In the low scale neighborhood, I know you're asking about medium scale, but I have to go through this to get my thoughts correct. There's no time limit, right? You can take down the house and leave it vacant for 5 years. There doesn't have to be a house there, and you can build a single family house and not meet minimum density. But in medium scale, which you asked, Jessica, that is a higher density. You can take, if you have a house there, you can remove it, and as long as you rebuild the house within a year, we're all good. If you leave it for longer than a year, or if it's a vacant lot in the median scale, we're going to ask that you meet minimum density. So really, it shouldn't be as hard as it is, but for some reason it is. For the most part, complete redevelopment is when that, and that means taking everything down is going to trigger having to meet minimum density moving forward. Again, except we have that carve out in medium scale. Is if you have a single family house there, you're good to replace it within a year after tearing it down and not meet minimum density.
And then the second part of that question was, is there a way to request that medium scale area be reconsidered as low scale area?
Great question. The council has endorsed the preferred map, so the only way to do that would be to have them tell us to change it. So you can always write to the city council at cityofvancouver.us, and ask that. But it's pretty. They endorsed it by resolution because it's pretty determined at this point after a long process, but you certainly can always write to your council and request that they reconsider it. And yeah, so that is one way.
And then last question I have here is, will there be any changes made? This is, I guess, a similar question. Will there be any changes made from the current map to concentrate R6 zoning along major arterials while applying neighborhood scale standards within interior sites?
I think you mean the preferred alternative map that the council endorsed in December. And they were not planning on changes on that, again, unless they directed us to make those changes. R6 zoning won't exist in the new code. So all our zoning is changing, right? So there'll be, as Mark kind of showed in the beginning, low scale neighborhood, medium scale neighborhood, mixed use neighborhood, regional activity center, manufactured home park, institutional campus, industrial employment, and heavy industrial. Those will be and then there will be some parks and open space districts, but those are like the new zoning districts. I hope that answers your question, Lynn. But feel free to email us too if you want to talk more about it. I'm happy to jump on the phone or set up a quick Teams meeting if that would be helpful.
Great. If anyone wants to clarify the questions or follow up, you can do that now. We still have some time here. We'll stick around until 1 if people still have questions, but just generally, thank you so much for being here. I dropped some information about kind of action items. You can go online and explore the draft plan and draft zoning code. We've got a feedback form opened right now to just say, like, did we miss anything important? Is stuff clear? Do you still have any questions? That'll close at the end of March. If you're here attending a community presentation, but if you want to come to another one or share with your neighbors and community, we've got another one on Saturday, and I think another one on Wednesday of next week. Let me click back here. Yeah, this Saturday at City Hall, and then next Wednesday at the Cascade Park Community Library. Sign up for the email list. I send a bunch of information through that, and tons of information on our webpage that I've linked here. But of course, if you have any other questions, we want to make sure that you get your answers. So left the email in the chat as well. Again, here's one more question. Is the 1-year time frame for redevelopment reasonable? Getting my permits took at least 3 months and construction 6 more months just for an ADU.
That's a good clarification, Cynthia. We can make it more clear if we need to, but I think you just have to apply, right, within the 1-year time frame. You wouldn't have to receive your permit. So within 1 year of demolishing, you'd need to apply for a building permit. So that would kind of keep the clock moving as long as you were pursuing it. You know, that wouldn't. You're right. Wouldn't expire is the way we're looking at it.
And Mike, you have a question?
Oh, you're muted, Mike.
Sorry, I thought I just did that. It's a procedural question. The next two meetings are in person. Will they be as interactive as these meetings have been, these two virtuals?
Yeah, it'll be similar format. We'll almost, I think it's basically the same presentation. We'll take a break after kind of 2 times in the middle and once at the end. The meetings will not be recorded just because that's a little more challenging to do in person. And I guess one other difference is that we will have some food at the in-person events. So, but generally, yes, similar format, interactive, and we're here to answer your questions.
All right, I'll look forward to meeting you. Thank you.
So we're gonna hang out till 1 just in case questions pop up. But we just want to say thank you again for spending 2 hours of your day with us and for the feedback and questions. And yeah, Meredith said it, but let us know. We are happy to, we want to make sure, people get their questions answered and have all the information and can participate. So we are available at our Vancouver 2045 at cityofvancouver.us. Yeah, thanks so much all.